Welcome to this week's installment of the Paragraph of the Week. We're going to look today at the second paragraph of Plato's Apology. This begins at line 18b or so. Those lines in the margins are what we will refer to throughout our study of the Apology. Apology means defense. That is, when you make an apology, you're making a defense of what you have done. And here in Plato's Apology, there's the apology of Socrates against particular charges, and our hope today is to look at these charges. Let us read the paragraph of the week. So, first, men of Athens, Socrates says, it is just for me to speak in defense against the first false charges against me and the first accusers, and next against the later chargers and the later accusers. For many have accused me to you, even long ago, talking now for many years and saying nothing true, and I fear them more than Antiochus and those around him, although they too are dangerous. But the others are more dangerous men. They got hold of many of you from childhood, and they accused me and persuaded you, although it is no more true than the present charges, that there is a certain Socrates, a wise man, a thinker of the things aloft, who has investigated all things under the earth, and who makes the weaker speech the stronger. Those men of Athens who have scattered this report about are my dangerous accusers. For their listeners hold that investigators of these things also do not believe in gods. Besides, there are many of these accusers, and they have been accusing me for a long time now. Moreover, they spoke to you at an age when you were most trusting, when some of you were children and youths, and they accused me in a case that simply went by default, for no one spoke in my defense. And the most unreasonable thing of all is that it is not even possible to know and to say their names, unless a certain one happens to be a comic poet. End quote. So Socrates begins his defense speech in a really odd way. He mentions that there are accusers now, but that there are older accusers. There's two rows of charges. One charge has been around for a long time, and now there's the later charge that comes about, and this is why they are at the defense, why it is necessary to give a defense speech at this time. So Antiochus is among the later charges. They're not as dangerous, but they are dangerous men, and there's a certain comic poet, which we later see is Aristophanes, who is among the first accusers. Let's look at the various charges that these accusers levy against Socrates. So he really begins off by mentioning that these two rows of accusers that are very important for us to look at. One's long ago, one's more recent. One is less dangerous than the other, but both of them are generally in the dangerous category. What are the new charges against Socrates? Later on, at the Apology 24b, Socrates lists the indictment against him for which he is being tried. And the indictment goes something like this. Socrates does injustice by corrupting the young, and by not believing in the gods in whom the city believes, but in other daimonia that are novel. So these charges are three. Socrates corrupts the young. He does not believe in the city's gods, and he has introduced new gods into the city that are novel, that are undermining the city's own way of doing things. These, as Socrates says, are the less dangerous ones, but they are really floating on the surface of these deeper charges that have been around for a long time. Socrates lists those deeper charges in his apology speech. Let us take a look at them. These are the old charges, the old accusers, the first accusers. Here's what Socrates had said in the paragraph that we're looking at. But the others are more dangerous men. They got a hold of many of you in childhood. And they accused me and persuaded you, although there is no more true than the present charge, that there is a certain Socrates, a wise man, a thinker on things aloft, who has investigated all things under the earth and who makes the weaker speech the stronger. Those men of Athens who have scattered this report about are my dangerous accusers, for their listeners hold that the investigators of these things do not believe in gods. So these original accusers, as I say, tracing back to the comic poet Aristophanes, who in his in his play The Clouds, depicts Socrates as a somewhat ridiculous natural philosopher, levy deeper charges that are more important and have sunk into the public psyche. The first charge that these first accusers have made is that Socrates was a natural philosopher. Now, what this means is Socrates does not trust in the divine explanations about where the earth has come from, where justice comes from, how justice is enforced, that the city has provided. He doesn't believe that Zeus is a star, but rather that the star might be a big flame in the sky. He does not believe that the earth is a god, perhaps, but that the earth is something to be investigated or a natural phenomenon. So the explanations for all of the things around Socrates, he thinks may be subject to human inquiry instead of divine answers. And the assumption here is that all of these natural philosophers are not believers, and hence the very activity of investigating natural phenomenon corrupts the young if they are exposed to it. Socrates is dangerous, and we have known this for a long time. The second thing that these older accusers accuse Socrates of is that he was a sophist. That is, that he makes the weaker argument the stronger. And this has the ability to corrupt the young too. Socrates is a clever speaker. He can use his speaking, just like the sophists, in order to provide a defense for any particular position. This means that he teaches people how to be a liar. Socrates, so the accusation goes, was a spin doctor, someone who we admire for their ability to lie to us, and who aren't concerned about justice as such, but rather are concerned with getting their way and finding the arguments that will help persuade people to give him his way. Now this has the ability to corrupt the young too. That is, if people simply learn to be sophists, if they do not learn to love justice or follow the just argument, they will be corrupted. And Socrates, so the argument has gone from these dangerous accusers, has been a natural philosopher and a sophist from the get-go. And all of these, and I should say Socrates has a gaggle of students behind him. And he has created a cadre of people who aren't closely aligned to the city's goals, the city's gods, or a love of justice. This is the basis for the more recent accusations that Socrates corrupts the young. And then, as I say, all of these charges are traceable to Aristophanes, the comic poet. Once again, let us look at the paragraph. Besides, there are many of these accusers, and they have been accusing for a long time now. Moreover, they spoke to you at an age when you were most trusting, when some of you were children and youths, and they accused me in a case that simply went by default, for no one spoke in my defense. And the most unreasonable thing of all, that it is not even possible to know or to say their names unless a certain one happens to be a comic poet. So, there has been a long history of prejudice against philosophy. Now, one might ask two things about this. If there's such a long history of prejudice against philosophy, how come Socrates was allowed to live for so long in peace in Athens? That is, these first accusers are more dangerous, but they didn't lead directly for a long time to any charges against Socrates, and Socrates was nevertheless allowed to live in Athens in peace and to philosophize. So what has changed? What has changed between those first charges and these later charges that Socrates now is persona non grata in Athens? Or is it that these charges took so long to bubble about, to percolate, that the fertile ground for them had been prepared, these later charges had been prepared by the first charges that Aristophanes and those with him levied against him? Now, we just must recognize that all of these charges, that Socrates corrupts the young, that Socrates doesn't believe in the city's gods, that Socrates investigates natural phenomenon, and doesn't trust divine explanations, all of them undermine the opinions on which this particular city rests. All of them strike at the heart of the idea that the city's cave is the source of all wisdom. All of them show that Socrates is not accepting the city's explanations, that he is perhaps undermining the city's foundation. And all of these charges, in other words, and this is the central point to the idea that Socrates, the philosopher, is definitely in conflict with the city. That is, that their ways of life point against one another, or that they repulse one another. But we get this added spin on it too, that the poets, Aristophanes, are the defenders of the city, or that they are aligned closely with the city. They are able to identify the problems that philosophers have and seek to educate the city, these poets, about the philosopher's problems. We will investigate these matters more closely in our plenary session, and hope you enjoy the rest of the Republic.